In June 1812, the United States of America declared war on the British Empire, the most powerful force on Earth at the time. Though brief, this war would shape the fate of an entire continent. For centuries from the 15th century onward, European empires expanded their dominance over the lands they had discovered. The native peoples of the Americas, the original inhabitants, were swept aside by this tidal wave of conquest and colonization. By the 1700s, Britain had established powerful colonies along the Atlantic coast of North America. They were known as the 13 Colonies, vital outposts of the British Empire. But near the end of the 18th century, these colonies rose up in rebellion. Fueled by Enlightenment ideals and anger over British rule, they fought for independence. After years of bloody war, they succeeded. In 1776, the United States of America was born. This was a tremendous blow to Britain, its greatest imperial defeat to date. But the British were not finished in North America. To the north, they retained control of Canada, and on the western frontier, they still held sway through alliances with Native American tribes. The United States, still young and full of ambition, began expanding westward, pushing deeper into indigenous lands. But their path was blocked by native nations determined to resist. Many of these tribes found an unlikely ally in Britain. Though the British had once fought them, now they provided arms and support, not out of friendship, but to keep the Americans in check. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, the Napoleonic Wars were raging. Napoleon Bonaparte had risen to power in France and was challenging the old order of Europe. In need of funds for his wars, Napoleon sold the vast Louisiana territory to the United States in 1803. This historic deal doubled the size of the country and made westward expansion even more urgent. As America pushed west, conflict with native tribes intensified, and tension with Britain mounted. As Napoleon's wars escalated, Britain responded with a total naval blockade. They forbade neutral countries from trading with France. American ships were stopped, searched, and seized. Goods were confiscated. Sailors were taken. This policy, known as impressment, enraged the Americans. Thousands of U.S. sailors were kidnapped and forced to serve on British warships. It was a grave insult to American sovereignty. Trade, the lifeblood of the U.S. economy, which was being strangled. But Britain, locked in a life-or-death struggle with Napoleon, refused to back down. In Washington, a new generation of politicians came to power. They were young, nationalistic, and hungry for expansion. They were called the War Hawks. They saw British actions as intolerable. They also believed that war would allow them to strike at Britain's weakest point, Canada. They argued that Canada was sparsely defended and that its people, mostly recent British settlers, would welcome American liberators. It would be, they claimed, a swift and glorious conquest. But there was another dimension to this war, one even more personal and immediate. On the western frontier, native resistance was growing stronger. At its heart stood a remarkable leader, Tecumseh, a Shawnee warrior and visionary. Together with his brother, known as the Prophet, Tecumseh worked to unite dozens of indigenous nations into a single powerful alliance. His vision was radical, a united, indigenous front to stop the expansion of the United States. Tecumseh refused to sell any more land. He traveled from tribe to tribe, urging unity, discipline, and resistance. The United States saw Tecumseh as a serious threat. In 1811, William Henry Harrison, governor of the Indiana Territory, led a preemptive attack on Prophetstown, the center of the Indigenous Alliance. The battle was fierce and chaotic. Though the Americans claimed victory, the alliance was far from defeated. Tecumseh was not present at the battle. When he returned, he found his confederation damaged but not broken. Now more than ever, he turned to Britain for support. British agents provided weapons and supplies to native warriors, fueling American fury. By mid-1812, war seemed inevitable. On June 18, 1812, the United States officially declared war on Great Britain. The reasons were many. British interference with American shipping, the impressment of American sailors, support for native resistance. and the desire to conquer Canada. It was a bold move, but perhaps not a wise one. The United States was deeply divided over the war. Its army was small and poorly trained. Its navy was outmatched by the Royal Navy. Still, many believed that Canada could be taken quickly, perhaps in a matter of weeks. They were wrong. The American invasion of Canada began in the summer of 1812. But instead of victory, it brought disaster. American forces were defeated in battle after battle. They underestimated both British-Canadian resistance and native warriors led by Tecumseh. The most humiliating moment came when General William Hull surrendered the entire city of Detroit without a fight, terrified by the threat of Tecumseh's forces. In contrast, the British and their native allies fought with coordination and determination. Tecumseh, in particular, proved to be an inspiring leader and a master strategist. War spread across the Great Lakes, the Mississippi Valley, and even into the Atlantic. Battles were fought on water and land. Both sides suffered terrible losses, and civilians, settlers and indigenous alike, endured immense suffering. Though the U.S. had some victories, including naval battles on Lake Erie and the defense of Baltimore, the war dragged on longer than anyone had expected. 1813, at the Battle of the Thames in Ontario, Tecumseh was killed in combat. His death marked the collapse of the Indigenous alliance he had built. To this day, no one knows exactly where he is buried, but his legacy endures as one of the greatest Indigenous leaders in North American history. In 1814, British forces invaded the American capital. They captured Washington, D.C., and set fire to its public buildings, including the White House. It was a moment of national humiliation for the United States, but it also stirred patriotic resolve. At Fort McHenry outside Baltimore, American defenders held firm against a British assault. The battle inspired Francis Scott Key to write a poem, one that would later become the U.S. national anthem, the Star-Spangled Banner. By late 1814, both sides were exhausted. In Europe, Napoleon had been defeated and exiled. Britain no longer needed to focus so heavily on North America. On December 24, 1814, the Treaty of Ghent was signed. It ended the war, but changed almost nothing. No land changed hands. No major demands were met. The war ended in a stalemate, but it had lasting consequences. For the British, the war reaffirmed their hold on Canada. For Canadians, it marked the beginning of a distinct national identity, one separate from both Britain and the United States. For Native Americans, it was a tragedy. Tecumseh's dream was gone. The United States continued its expansion westward, and Native resistance never again reached the same level. For Americans, the war became a symbol of resilience and national pride. Out of a conflict they had largely mismanaged, they salvaged a sense of unity and strength. And for the world, the War of 1812 marked the final chapter in the great age of colonial empires in North America. The War of 1812 was messy, complex, and often misunderstood. It was a war of pride, power, and survival, with no true victors. But its echoes can still be heard across the continent today, in the borders it defined, in the nations it shaped, and in the people who lived and died on all sides of the conflict. This was the War of 1812.